Welcome to News 24's election coverage for 2019. Everyone is extremely excited about what is going to happen on the 8th of May. We are moving very close to it now. The parties are in their final preparation phase. And I'm joined by our resident elections analyst, Dawie Scholtz. Dawie, thank you very much for joining us in Auckland Park.
It's good to be here.
Let's talk about the ANC, the governing party. They've been the governing party since 1994. There are a number of interesting trends that we've seen emerging over the last couple of years. What's been your take of the party's electoral performance since 2004, when they reached their absolute zenith of 69.69% of support?
Yep, it's been an absolutely crucial last 5 to 10 years for the ANC, and I think the electoral trends that we've seen is a gradual reduction in ANC support. And I think the 2016 local government elections was sort of where it reached its crescendo, right? And if we think about particularly the last 10 years, the Zuma era, I think is where it picked up a lot of steam. In 2011, nationally, the ANC got 62% of the vote. In the 2016 local government election, just 5 years later, they were down to 54. So that's -8.
Yes.
And we see that across the board in different provinces. We see it in different parts of the electorate. We see it not just in the traditional part of the electorate where the ANC struggled, the minority electorate, but we also see it in large swaths of the black electorate throughout the country. So 2016 was a particularly bad election for the ANC. And I think that is a tough baseline to start off with. So I just said 54.
Yeah.
We know that local government elections and national elections aren't perfectly comparable.
Yes.
But if you look at those voting patterns in the 2016 election and you project them onto a normal national government election turnout pattern, then the starting point for me in this election for the ANC is something like 56 and a half.
Okay.
And that's a tough place to start, and I'm not saying that's what I think they're going to get, but that is what the 2016 result implies in this election. We know that a lot has changed since 2016.
Yeah.
That's why this election is so interesting, because in 2016 the ANC was saddled with Jacob Zuma, with a lot of really big questions about state capture, and they still are to some extent. But now there's a new leader, it's Cyril Ramaphosa, and we've seen in the polling who is much, much more popular than Jacob Zuma. And I think the key question for me is, will Cyril Ramaphosa's personal popularity drive the ANC to a number that is higher than what the 2016 result suggests? And that to me is the critical question, because if the ANC gets something like 62 again, or 61 or 60, it means that Cyril was essentially able to save the ANC brand. But if we look at a result similar or weaker than the 2016 numbers, so something like 57, 56, 55 for the ANC, then it suggests that the damage that has been done to the ANC brand by state capture, by the Jacob Zuma era over the last 10 years, has had a long-term impact that Cyril didn't necessarily overcome in this election, and I think that's the critical question for the ANC.
Dawie, 60% for the ANC it's a magical number for the opposition and the ANC. They've gone from 69 to 65 to 62. There was a gradual decline. What do you put it down to? I mean, in 2004, 69, 3% more than you need to change the constitution, for example, which was a big fear amongst opposition parties, never utilized or never exercised. Then the gradual drop that we saw. If we look at the projection for this election, is there a number that you could put on state capture? If you take into consideration the gradual decline that we've seen, the natural decline that we've seen, what would be a number in your mind which would tell the electorate that the ANC has been punished because of the last 9 years under Jacob Zuma?
I think anything under the 2016 level, and as we've just discussed, the 2016 level is something like 56, 57%.
Okay.
Anything under that suggests to me that the ANC is being punished further, and that, remember 2016 was really bad, so just to be at that level is already, I think, pretty bad for the ANC, but to be even lower suggests that the revelations that have come out of the Zondo Commission and many of the other issues that the ANC have faced in the last 6 months or so had a negative impact on the electorate and is driving the ANC down.
Do you think then it's a given that they will go under 60%?
Absolutely not. So I mean, my expectation is, if I had to put a central point on it, is something like the high 50s, 58, 59 for the ANC. That's what I anticipate. So what I'm saying is a bit of an overperformance over 2016, right? But having said that, I think it's entirely possible that the ANC could actually reach 60 or 61 in this election. But similarly, it's also entirely possible that they could 56 or 55 in this election. So there's a band, right?
If they reach 61, I would argue probably that they've outperformed themselves, and they campaign out of their socks then.
Exactly, and I think if that was the case, then Cyril Ramaphosa will have major kudos, I think, because if we look at the ANC's approval rating and you look at Cyril Ramaphosa's approval rating, the ANC rating barely scratches 60. His is way above that. And then you would have said, well, actually, the ticket leader, the party leader, pushed up support for the party, where in the past, I think Jacob Zuma's approval rating was much lower than the ANC's approval rating and was kind of part of pulling down the ANC's national number. So we'll have to wait and see how it plays out.
What do you make of the ANC's election campaign thus far? It's been very difficult, speaking to senior ANC leaders, it's a difficult case to make given what's happened in the past. They're trying to put distance between themselves and the recent corrupt past that they have. What do you make of their campaign?
I think it's been a very, very difficult campaign, I agree. And to be frank, I'm not particularly impressed. I feel like the opposition have had very issue-driven specific campaigns. The EFF has been talking a lot about land and jobs. That was on their poster. And the DA has been talking a lot about borders, jobs, crime and corruption. Versus the ANC talking in relatively fluffy terms, I think for the first time, about growing South Africa. Now that's a simple message that people can understand, but it's not particularly issue-driven. So that's, I think, the one thing that concerns me a little bit about the ANC campaign. And the other one I would say is also that, as you've said, a lot of their messaging has been apologetic about what's happened in the last 10 years. So it's almost as if the ANC is running this election campaign in an apologetic tone, saying we're sorry for what happened over the last 10 years. And we're
not that self-confidence that they always had.
And we're trying to fix it. Please give us another chance to fix it. And I think it's up to the electorate to decide whether that is a message that lands for them or not. But I just know, looking at polling, apologizing is losing in politics. That's a simple rule of thumb. And it's not, as you've said, that confidence they've had in previous years. So it's been a tough campaign for them.
They've got a strong core of traditional voters that will vote for them regardless what the situation around the party in the country is. Are they losing voters on the sides of those core? Is it being eroded? Can you see that happening?
Absolutely. So I think we don't know exactly what will happen with their core support in this election. We will have to wait and see, but we can look at historic trends, right? And the one that I often mention is the black electorate in Gauteng is a very good example. So if you do the demographic analysis for the full province of Gauteng and look at all of the black voters in Gauteng, in 2011 the ANC won 87% of those voters. In 2014 they were down to 78%. In 2016 they were down to 69%. So if you do the math, that's minus 18% in 5 years in the black electorate in Gauteng. That is, as you've said, at the margins. Those loyal core supporters of the ANC have gone elsewhere, and they've gone mostly to the EFF, a little bit to the DA. The critical question in this election is, will Ramaphosa be able to win those supporters back? So is it going to be 69% again, or is it going to be 75 or 78 or something higher, that there is some movement back to the ANC, in which case they will carry Gauteng quite easily? Or is this trend going to continue and they'll be below 69% in the townships in Gauteng, and then they'll lose Gauteng most likely if they're under that level? And Peter, for me, that is the one critical indicator. You were talking about this core number. To me, it's not necessarily the national result, because there's a lot of noise in the national result. Minority votes are in there, turnout is in there, etc., etc. But it really is the black voting pattern, the ANC's historic strong support base, and the level to which they stick with the ANC in this election, to me, is the critical indicator, and particularly in Gauteng. Is it going to be 69% or less? Because that would suggest to me that there's some punishment for state capture.
And lastly, if you look at voter turnout, there's been a downward trend as well over the last couple of elections. What does a high voter turnout do for the ANC, and what does a low voter turnout do for the ANC?
So I think the conversation about turnout in our elections has been a little bit simplistic, because it's not always just about what the level of turnout is. So 78% is really high and 68% is not so high. The real question is not 78 or 68, it's who turns out. So no matter what the number is, the question is what is the mix of people in the kind of electorate that have actually turned out. And what we've seen for the last 3 elections is that suburban voters and minority voters in particular, so white, coloured and Indian voters, have turned out at disproportional rates for the last 3 elections, much higher than the ANC's core base in the townships. And that has driven up the DA numbers and driven down the ANC numbers. And a good example of that is in the townships or in Gauteng in 2016, the townships turned out at about 53%, the suburban areas turned out at 71%. So when you get a massive split like that, it drives up the opposition vote and down the ANC vote. So it's a crucial variable for the outcome in the election, and I think you're right. We've seen in the last elections the trend is gradually down, and the downwards trend is being driven by lower township turnout primarily. And if that continues, it will be bad for the ANC. So I think it will be really, really important for the ANC to turn out its core supporters, and I think that's another variable that we just don't know, and it's impossible to know until we actually start seeing the results in election night.
Dawie, every party leader is going to sleep very uneasily the night before the election.
As they should.
But if you are Cyril Ramaphosa, how would you go to bed on the evening of the 7th May?
I would probably go to bed knowing that I'm going to be elected as president of the country, or my party will win more than 50% of the vote. So I think that's one reason to sleep easy. The ANC will be in government. But I think a critical question that I would face and that I feel nervous about is exactly where is this going to end up? Because as I've said, there's a very plausible scenario for 56% for the ANC, but there's similarly a very plausible scenario for 61% for the ANC. And I think Cyril Ramaphosa's hand within the party and his ability to dictate certain things and affect macroeconomic policy is quite different between the 61% scenario and the 56% scenario. And I guess you, as Cyril Ramaphosa, would really, really, really hope that you're on the 61 end of that particular equation.
Thank you, Dawie. Dawie Scholtz will be our resident analyst at the Results Operational Centre in Pretoria. Follow his and the rest of the team's analysis on news24.com.